Good morning and welcome to episode number 6 of In Bad Form. My name is Mark and I am your host. And today's podcast is going to be on my internal experience. I want to do a podcast on what it is like to be inside my mind. And as this developed, it went from trying to communicate or trying to share what it's like to be inside my mind to the evolution of what it was like to be inside my mind before enlightenment, after enlightenment, and then the many years after. And the way this started was actually it came as inspiration from the last podcast. By the way, thank you everybody for attending the group podcast. And I encourage anyone to come out to the next one. We're going to do them every other Sunday. So we just did one this Sunday, so we'll do one in 2 more Sundays. The first one was on Dzogchen, and the second one will be on the Trinistic model, my third book. But anyway, I really appreciate everybody coming. And I look forward to seeing you again. So what came out of that, usually every time I do a group discussion, there's always a question that I wish I would have answered. Every time, no fail. Every single one group discussion I've done, I'm always left with one question that sticks with me. That I didn't feel satisfied. And this time, the question was about my internal experience. Somebody was asking what it was like. I don't know exactly how they asked the question, but the way it was interpreted to me was they wanted to know what my internal experience was like. And I assume they wanted me to contrast it before enlightenment and post-enlightenment. And at the time, I didn't want to answer the question, and I didn't. I don't think I did. But I know I didn't want to. I didn't want to get distracted because that podcast was going to be about Dzogchen. And I wanted to keep the focus there. And also, I was super excited about the Dzogchen because I've been, working up to that podcast all week. But that was a very good question. And in the middle of the night, I thought of it, and I couldn't. I know what it was. When I thought of the question, I went to look for my experience. Like I went to look for the answer. I was thinking about the question, and I just quietly looked into myself for the answer. And I was coming up, and I just started jotting down just notes about ways that I could express what it's like to be in my mind. And I just kept going with it and going more and just writing down more notes about what it's like, different aspects. And as I did, then I started to go back further to like, okay, even if this isn't necessarily what it's like to be in my mind now, as I'm digging back, I'm getting memories of what it was like to be in my mind, let's say a month ago or 6 months ago. So I just started writing down all the notes, all the different, mental machinations of what it's like to be in my mind, all the way back, as much as I could think of, anything that I could think of, any type of experience, what it was like, my internal experience, what my internal world is like. I just started writing it down. And then after I wrote it down, then I kind of organized it chronologically. Then I took all those things and think, okay, this is what it's like now. This was what it was like at the beginning, and then different stages. So what I have is about 6 different categories. The first one will be about what it was like to be in my mind, what my internal experience was like. The year leading up to the Enlightenment experience that I had in August of 2002. So first will be that. I'll describe what it was like, or at least what the memories I have, what it was like to be in my mind. And the memories are good because remember, our practice is always the mind. So you're aware of the mind because that's all you're practicing, the mind. So, I got a pretty vivid memory of all my mental machinations throughout the years, because that's all we're doing, paying attention to the mind. So it all came to me super easy. All right. So then after what it was like before, then I'm going to have a special category that when some of these dynamics, we'll just say, some of these dynamics of what it was like to be in my mind were so pervasive throughout the beginning, let's say from 2002 to now, that I couldn't really put them in any chronological category. So I just put them in a category called a common theme throughout all the phases. And then after that, I have a phase, let's say right after Enlightenment, and then it was completely different. Let's say 7 years later, it was a different phase. My mind, it would be a different experience to be in my mind. And I don't remember. I'll get to the years, but basically, there's about 3 or 4 different phases. So I have these broken up into 6. So the first one we're going to start with on 2002. So what it would like to be inside my mind prior to and leading up to August of 2002. Now, some of these will just be qualities, and then some of these will be literally what it was like. But a lot of these, like I said, just have to be described in qualities because they're just moods or foundations that shape all of the other specific experiences of what it's like to be in my mind. So some of these I realize are not going to be experiences, but they're necessary to color the experiences because there's not just experiences. There's something indefinable, a mood, a something. But anyway, so let's start. So 2002, what it was like to be inside my mind at that point was, like I said, the first thing was the mood. I wrote down earnest seeking, the only thing in life that enthused me. And so what I meant by that is that my mind, like let's say if you're a sports person, your mind's always going to come back to sports. If you're a young guy and you're into girls, your mind's always going to come back to girls. If you're into money, your mind's always going to somehow come back to money. So for me, this path, this self-exploration, self-examination, inquiry, whatever you want to call it, contemplation, that's the only thing that ever really enthused me in life. I was never, I just never really, except for music, there's really nothing that I really ever loved in life until this. So that's, again, that's the mindset. That's part of the mindset. And the next thing I had written down was gratitude and devotion. And I also wrote down the silent half, and the understanding is the active half. Oh, I get it. Yeah. And the reason I wrote that down, gratitude and devotion, is because it's something I don't ever talk about. I think I have talked about it before, but it's rare that I talk about because it's the silent half. There's 2 huge parts of my practice, or my life experience, which is, I guess, is our practice. Our life is our practice. So for me, there's been 2 practices I've had. In the yoga way of describing them, one would be the bhakti yoga, which is the path of devotion. And then the other one is the jnana yoga, which is the path of understanding. So looking at it through that lens, my practice, my life has been about devotion / understanding. So half of my life has just been about devotion, gratitude towards nothing in particular. And maybe that's why it's hard to talk about, because it's just general gratitude, general devotion to not anything in particular. Not to a God or even to reality, or maybe to reality, but just to just the expression of devotion, the expression of gratitude. And actually, I take that back because, I have used words like, I surrender to the universe or God or reality. I've got no problems with any of these words. But anytime that I've used these words, God, universe, reality, whatever, I know it's just I've always known it's just a greater extension of myself, something bigger, a bigger part that's somehow connected, not connected. I always knew it was, me, not me, connected, bigger, greater. So, but something that I trusted bigger than myself. Let's just say that. So half the path has always been devotion, gratitude. That was the silent part. That's the part you can't talk about. That's why all my books are not about that. They're about the second part, which is about the understanding path. Outwardly, you could assume that all I care about is understanding. Understanding is all. And it is true. I do feel like understanding is everything. But like I said, there's a silent part to all that, which is the devotional aspect, the gratitude aspect, just being grateful and devoted to something bigger than you, something collective. Let's just call it that, the collective or the totality. All right. And the next thing I have written down is, okay, now we start to get into more tangible, what it was actually like to be inside my mind at 2002. The next thing I have written down is I wrote down the word or phrase deliberate opening. My practice was constantly deliberately opening. Just, whenever you come back to yourself and realize you're in the moment, it would be a reminder to open. Just open, to be receptive. I think openness is good. I think people get that. Be open, receptive, just deliberate opening. That's the key, though, as I wrote down deliberate. It was something I always had to remind myself, deliberately open, deliberately relax, deliberately come into yourself, deliberately rest. It was a very deliberate thing where I was constantly reminding myself to open, to relax, to be, to stop moving. All right. The next thing that I wrote down was realizing the futility of effort. That was in the forefront of my mind, just realizing that any thought, any doing, any type of anything is just fruitless. And and I know we're about to touch into the surrendering and all that, and that's why it's important to say surrendering is not a thing that you do out of, let's say, out of duty, out of a pious reason or a religious reason, or thinking that's what you think God wants you to do. For me, surrendering just came from the simple futility of effort. It's not that I didn't try. I tried and tried and tried and tried. That's what brought about the surrendering. Not because you think it's, like I said, a spiritual thing to do. For me, it's just the true futility of effort. All right. So I wrote down deliberately giving up as if I had to remind myself not to get burned again by effort. So this comes back to the deliberate opening again. So if you were to look in my mind in 2002, you'd experience somebody that was deliberately giving up. Like I said, as if I had to remind myself to give up. Like, no. We're not going down this road of effort. We're not going down this road of building, of creating. No, we're not doing that. I'm not even going to try. Which brings me to the last one, or next one that I wrote, which is the last desire, being sick of myself, being sick of life as it was constant movement. And when I say sick of life, I really mean my internal life, because my external life was good. I had a wife, daughter, job, nothing to complain about my external life. But when I say sick of life, as it was constant movement, just my internal life, because that's what we're talking about. So we're talking about my internal life. So when I say I was sick of life, I was just sick of my internal life, because that's where it's happening. And that's what I'm starting to, for my wife, I'm starting to use the word, the laboratory. The laboratory is your internal world. So the example I use it with her is like if she goes to work and comes home and has complaints, I'll say, let's talk more about the laboratory. The laboratory is your reactions to all these things that happened. We're not going to talk about the people. We're not going to talk about the things that happened. The laboratory is your reaction to things happening. So being sick of life as it was constant movement, that comes back to the, like I said, my internal experience that I was sick of. That's the laboratory. Your internal experience is the laboratory. Leave everybody else out of it. You just work on yourself. It's your laboratory. It's your experience. You're not going to help anybody, yourself or others, by trying to help or, correct them, fix them. So for me, the last desire, being sick of myself and sick of my internal world as it was constant movement. So again, that comes back to just that futility of effort. And that last desire, I've written about it, but I'll just speak about it since I mentioned it. The last desire is a desire. It is a desire. And that specific desire is to desire to have no more desires. That is exactly how I felt. I desired strongly to have no more desires. A strong desire. And that I knew it. And that's why I called it this my last desire. I just want this more than anything, to not have desires. So, but anyway, you would watch that play out in my mind. By just that's what began the process of being able to just let go of all my thoughts easy, because you just see the futility. Like, that thought's going to go to this and that, and it's going to amount to anything. I'm just sick of it. Sick of the whole fucking thing. All the movements, just done. And so that made you less likely just to follow your thoughts and build them up and animate them and make them turn into something that's now a fictitious entity. All right. So the next thing that I wrote, if you could be inside my mind, in 2002 was show me. I wrote down show me, feeling that a larger awareness encompassing my experience. And what I meant by that is if you could be in my mind at the time, there was always a feeling or an expression of show me. And I'm talking to reality. I'm talking to that larger awareness that's encompassing my experience. Show me. I wanted it to show me the truth, show me reality, show me the things that I was contemplating, the one, the many, life, reality. What is it? I wanted it to show me. And actually at that time, like I said, I was working on the triune, so I was really working on specific things we'll go into later, but I wanted it to show me. And looking. And it's not just show me, but it's show me and then going back to contemplation and just leaning into it. Leaning into contemplation, whatever the question is, whatever your thing is, whether you're talking about free will or, what is life with the self, the individual, whatever your particular thing is, just show me and then look into it. Just look, just contemplate whatever that particular aspect is. The next thing that I wrote down was, what is my basic experience? Contemplate being before any movement. And what I mean by that is, if you could be inside my mind at the time, constantly I was just looking for my basic experience. What is this? Just what is this? Just this. And that's when I'd come up with things like with the lighter flowing, the hissing of a lighter, just the gas. I just do all these things, just try to figure what is basically here. What is at the bottom? When you let go of everything, you just relax into what is it? So if you're with me in 2002, you'd see a lot of that. Another thing, the last thing, by the way, that I wrote down about 2002 was I was always contemplating stillness versus movement. I was always obsessed with that. You could go back and look at my writings. I think everything was always the contrast of stillness versus movement. And when you look for your basic experience, you see that. You see that contrast. And there's many deep things. I went into the book about it. I won't get into here, but a lot of deep stuff. But it all comes down to just the stillness and movement and the relationship between stillness and movement, or just really going into stillness or really going into movement or the contrast. But like I said, if you were with me in my mind in 2002, you'd see somebody just contemplating stillness and a movement versus movement, however you want to put it, the contrast of stillness and movement. And it didn't matter. All right. So now we come to, so that was like what it was like leading all the way up to August 2002. The next category are a bunch of mental experiences that were so common throughout all the phases. I just put them in the category of their own because this is something that existed then and it exists now. So these are the consistents from 2002 to now, 20 years later. The first one that I wrote down was passing content. The common theme contrast to the unchanging that is emphasized as foundation. Oh, wait. Shoot. All right. Passing content. Common theme contrast to the unchanging that is emphasized as the foundation. Okay, so what I'm talking about. So now this is all post-enlightenment. So post-enlightenment, you're super now aware of the unchanging. That's your baseline, is just operating from the unchanging, the unmoving. So for me, the common theme that when I'm looking at my life experiences is you're just seeing everything as content. Everything's just content, whatever it is. Feelings, shapes, colors, just content. Everything is you're just noticing everything as content. Whereas I don't think I've ever noticed that in my life before. But now you're just noticing everything's just passing content. And as the years go by, you have different ways to express the passing content. For example, like colors and shapes were the first one for me. Like I just saw everything, just colors and shapes, wherever I'd be, just everything. So if you're in my mind at that time, it was just noticing colors and shapes. Everything is colors and shapes, because you're so much in your head, or not in your head, but in your mind, or in the background, that the emphasis really isn't on putting meaning to the colors and shapes. So instead of just colors and shapes, you're just aware colors and shapes. So there's a lot of that, just passing content, colors and shapes. And the next one that I wrote down was don't know mind. And that seems to just be where you rest, until you deliberately move your mind to think about things or notice things or, there's a good example. So you're in don't know mind, just nothing. And then let's say the colors and shapes, you notice them. Now you turn your don't know mind into noticing colors and shapes mind. So if you're in my mind at, in this time period, it would be don't know mind, not really thinking anything, and then colors and shapes, and then noticing, oh, there's colors and shapes. And then maybe, who knows, maybe even taking the next step of, whatever those colors and shapes are. I mean, every moment is different. The next thing that I wrote down, and this is still in the category of general common themes. So passing content, don't know mind, and thoughts have no energy to bind and thrive. And that's probably why the don't know mind is so prevalent in the default, because whatever thoughts do pop up in the don't know mind, they don't have any energy to bind or marry each other, like I described in the stick man. If you looked at my example of a stick man, it's your thoughts. Thoughts are fine. Thoughts pop up. They arise. They're natural. None of this is to ever get rid of your thoughts. It's just to relax into whatever is. And the spontaneous arising will arise as thoughts, but they don't have any energy to bind with each other. It's just a thought, and I wrote down and thrive. So thoughts have no energy to bind and thrive. And what I mean by bind and thrive is marrying each other. So this thought marries another thought, which you start to create an aggregate of thoughts, and that turns into like what I described as the stick man. Now you have something that seems real, and your awareness, your attention is inflating those thoughts or animating those thoughts with the sense of realness. But they're not. The realness is awareness. And you're projecting your awareness onto those thoughts, giving them, animating them like a light behind it, making them seem alive and moving. But the only alive moving is your mind. It's always the only thing that's ever alive and moving is the mind. All right, so thoughts have no energy to bind and thrive. Another one, so I wrote after that, was thinking dies on the vine, like a flash of lightning in the dark, a quick rise and decay. So I like that. Thinking dies on the vine. So thinking happens, but as quick as it's born, it just withers away. Born, withers away. So you just see the beginning and end real quick. Beginning and end. It doesn't have any juice behind it to keep it going, to perpetuate it, or to let it marry the next thought and say, oh yeah, oh and of course, and that, oh, and therefore, now you're off in Never Never Land. So thinking dies on the vine. A quick flash of lightning in the dark just appears, a quick rise and decay. Like I said, it's because they don't have any energy animating them. All right. Next thing I wrote down was a feeling of pure being is noticed as if freshly rediscovered again. And that's exactly what it's like, because life is not a constant. Life is a series of experiences, moments. So you do have that feeling of pure being is refreshed. And that's why I'm always saying that everything is perfect, because even the worst things in the world that you could experience, they're always going to point you back to that pure being, if that's your practice. If you've committed yourself to self-discovery, to truth, however you want to look at it, then you're always going to come back to that pure being, because that is the only thing that remains. And anything is going to point you back to that feeling of pure being. So you're getting reminded constantly of being pointed back to the pure being. Your thoughts are pointing you to pure being. And movements, everything is just pointing you back to pure being. But it's noticed as if it's freshly rediscovered again. And then the last thing I wrote down for the common theme throughout all the phases is gratitude and love. Just, that's a thing. So if you're in my mind, that's what it'd be like. You're just always coming back to feeling, oh my God, just, thank you for this. Thank you. And this, that you're being thankful for, is this. That is the spaciousness. The gratitude is for the spaciousness. That's the gratitude. The gratitude is for this. Just that alive awareness. That's right here for all of us. For all of us. For our lack of awareness or depth of awareness, it's here for all of us. And love, yes, that feeling of just always coming back to love. Just, I love you. In my mind, like if you were to be inside my mind, even now from the last 20 years, the most words you're going to hear is thank you or I love you. Thank you or I love you. And it's never about anything in particular. It's just this. Just the pure being, just being. Thank you and I love you. Thank you and I love you. All right. So those are the common themes. So now we'll get to specifics. So now this goes back to my earliest experiences just after Enlightenment. So 2002, post-August. So let's say starting in September of 2003. The first thing that I wrote down was feeling untouchable. So this was like, now I'm going back to my memories of what it was like to be in my mind directly after Enlightenment, the months following Enlightenment. Actually, I don't change things until 2009, so you could look at it as the months or even the years, because I didn't really change things up until 2009. But from 2002, if you could be in my mind, if you could be inside with me, sharing my internal experience, what you'd feel was that I noticed and I was feeling untouchable. And the best quote for that was I got from a Douglas Harding forum or website. It's something from the Bhagavad Gita, so I'm not even familiar with what it is, but I loved what best spoke to what I was experiencing was a quote that said, "Not wetted by water and not burned by fire." And that was like the most perfect descriptive way of how I felt, because that's how it feels to be outer space. That's what it feels like to just be spaciousness. You're untouchable. Nothing could grasp you. Nothing could touch you. You're unmovable. Not wetted by water, not burned by fire. Nothing could touch you. So that was the most palpable thing. The next thing that I wrote down was mind like mud or molasses, in the sense that it doesn't make ripples. What I noticed when I get in my car and drive to work, the difference is, because you're driving to work all the time, so you know what it's like for it to be inside your mental space. And now when I started to drive to work post-August, I noticed my mind was like mud, or it was like molasses. And by that, what I mean by it was slow and thick, but in a good way. I know that probably doesn't sound good, slow and thick, but it was good. It feels like that's why I mentioned the doesn't make ripples. So if you touch water, that would have been like what my life was like before that in my mental state. Any kind of conditions or changes that happen in my mind, there's going to be ripples and there's going to be activity, there's going to be movement. And I remember I was saying I was getting sick of that movement. I was sick of that movement. And so now that's why I say the mud and molasses is actually good. It may sound bad, but it's actually good because I was sick of the movement. And now if whatever conditions would come in my mind, whatever thoughts or whatever emotions or attachments or whatever you want to call my mind, it would be like touching mud. It would be like touching honey. It just doesn't move it. It doesn't budge it. It'll move it, maybe even a little jiggle, but not the vibrations you're going to see in water. Extremely, and I don't know if the word is lipid or the opposite of lipid, but I guess it comes back to the untouchable thing. So the honey, or not the honey, the molasses or the mud, it's kind of, I guess, in the same neighborhood of feeling untouchable. But that's what your mind feels like. Just like it's not going to be moved much by the conditions or the activities. All right. The next thing that I wrote down was free vacation. That was another palpable thing. And I guess, like again, this addresses more of the mood. It's not that I was thinking ever I was on vacation. It's just the feeling you get when you're on vacation, like you're working for something your whole life and you're just done. You're just not doing it anymore. You're on vacation. You don't have to do anything. So that's the way I felt constantly. I don't have to do anything. It was a feeling of total relief and a total release because you don't have to accomplish anything. A complete of total self-satisfaction that you're done. There's nothing else. Just whatever. And like I said, for me, that was interpreted as a vacation. I don't care what I do. Whatever I do on my vacation is just bonus time. We could do this, we could do that, just vacation. Everything just felt like I didn't have to do anything anymore ever again. And that feeling was palpable. Next, I wrote down watching endless TV. So if you were in my internal mind and you were in my mind, in my experience, post-Enlightenment, you'd be watching a lot of TV. That's what, and this is, by the way, it did evolve a couple years later to once we got our pugs and I started going in the woods and walking on the mountains. Then I was doing more of that. But there was a good couple years there I was just watching TV. That's it, just watching endless TV. What was I watching? History Channel, Discovery Channel, reality TV. I think The Office was on at the time, a sitcom. I think that was the only sitcom I liked, The Office or Community. But, just History Channel, documentaries, anything about life, anything but the world, All right. So a lot of TV watching. You'd see that if you were with me. A lot of TV watching. Movie watching too. And that takes me to the next thing I wrote down was movie virtual reality. Feeling like the world is a virtual reality, but not in the customary way that I think most people think of virtual reality. Most people think of their virtual reality and the focus is on like Neo being in a world. And that is there though. The whole thing of you're in a simulation or something like that, that's there. But really the focus of the virtual reality for me was always the emphasis of being still, of being perfectly still and unmoving while the world forms in front of you. So it's similar, very similar to the virtual reality simulation thing, but the emphasis of the feeling is really just that you're perfectly still and all these colors and shapes and movements are coming to you, and then they change. So like you'll go from one room, let's say if you go to a football game, you're just perfectly still, and then a football game comes to you. Then you go to work, then your work comes for you. So really the emphasis when I'm saying what it would be like to be inside my mind at that time would just be viewing the world as if it were just like a screen. Just like a screen, and the pictures are changing. Oh, now I'm here. Now I'm here. Now I'm here. Now this is that, and you're just looking at it from that perspective. Or actually, that I'm not here. I'm not here. Now this appears before me. Now this appears before me. And then the next thing I wrote in 2002. Oh, the colors and shapes. But I actually covered that earlier when. The very first thing I noticed was I was just always, looking at the world, and I just come to it realizing, just colors and shapes everywhere. I wasn't going the next step of making meaning out of the colors and shapes, just noticing just everything's just colors and shapes everywhere around, just colors and shapes. All right. So next, like I said, was in 2009. So if you were to be in my world from 2003 to 2009, what I just described is what my experience or what your experience would be like. In 2009, I started hiking in nature with the pugs. So this brought about a huge change. Now my mental world was different because I'm out in nature now more. So in 2010, all right. So now if you were to visit me inside my mind and you were to accompany me in my mind and feel what it's like to have my mental experiences, in 2009, then what it was like was I was always feeling like nature was informing me. The trees and the leaves and the dirt and the water and how things fell and temperature and everything, I felt like it was showing me. The world, the Dharmakaya, was showing me through the Nirmanakaya its secrets. How, like, of multitude. You're just seeing the multitudes. You're seeing the infinite permutations of each multitude. How each one is like a different try in nature. Nature's going to try this. Now we'll try it slightly different. Now I'll have a slightly variation. The variations on the theme is what you notice. The variations of the leaves on the same theme, the variations of the sticks on the same theme, the variations of the specks of dirt on the same theme. But anyway, that's just one aspect. So every day you're out in nature. And so if you were to be in my mind, you're just looking at nature and it's just teaching you and you're just getting taught. Oh, this is nature. This is what nature does. This is how nature acts. This is the essence of nature, and this is the nature of nature. This is the activity of nature, and this is the fruit of nature. All right, so the next thing I wrote was all of my attention is towards allowing my intuition to show me symbols and dynamics of nature to convey, and I'm trying to do this on a split screen, that's why I'm hesitating. All right, all of my attention towards allowing my intuition to show me symbols and dynamics of nature to convey my experience of reality, drawing from the substratum like a magnet. All right, so I'll tell you what I meant about that. All right, so once I started to feel like I was being informed or taught by nature, all of my attention was towards allowing my intuition to show me symbols and dynamics of nature. Okay, so what I mean by that is that now this goes back to me being a little bit more active, because now, once again, I'm leaning into reality to show me. And that's what I mean by all of my attention towards allowing my intuition to show me symbols. So I guess actually what this is, it's a deeper opening up. As I talked about before, a deliberate opening up. And then I said everything's always going to repeat itself over and over and over again, just deeper. Here's a perfect example, because this is now an example of me leaning into reality, leaning into myself, allowing my intuition to show me symbols or dynamics of nature. So if you were with me, if you were in my mind, sharing my experience, what you would experience is directing my attention towards deliberately opening up and allowing my intuition to show me symbols that I could take to convey this unspeakable reality and put it in words in my book to talk to you for this, just to communicate outwardly with my voice. And I just remember actively allowing my intuition just to look for these symbols so I could convey the unspeakable into words, to put it into words. And that's where my attention was. Constantly pushing, allowing. Drawing from the substratum like a magnet. What I mean by that is, oh man, this is it. This is all reality, but you're specifically zoning in on one specific thing and you're just pulling it out of the ethers. You're pulling it out of the aware space right there like a magnet. No, the magnet, it's like a magnet. Yeah, the magnet is pulling something very specific from the substratum. That's what it feels like. It's all there. By the way, when I say substratum, at this point in time, I was going through a very scientific part. I wasn't using any religious jargon. So substratum is just another way to say the foundation of everything. Well, it's at the bottom of creation before creation, underneath everything. So I'm looking at everything, the totality. So the totality is the substratum, the collective everything. The potential for everything is there, but I'm trying to draw something very specific out of it, like a magnet. My magnet is trying to pull out something very specific. And it happened to be that the specific thing for me was the triune, the symbols and everything like that. But I was trying to pull very specifically to show me tools and symbols so I could convey these things in words. And my book is a fruit of all that. All right, so the next thing I wrote, and the last thing for this era that I wrote, is aware of the world as a single alive room. And I actually wrote about this in my first book when I was trying to describe what the experience of enlightenment was like. If you were to be in my mind, if you were to accompany me and be in my imagination, 2010, I was vividly aware of the world as a single alive room. And this goes back to back to the virtual reality thing, where it's always the same room. It just changes colors and shapes to appear like a house, then a football game, nighttime, sleeping, dreaming, imagination. Eventually it's going to be death, bardos, out-of-body experiences, whatever. It's all happening in the single alive room. There's just this aware space, and this aware space just rearranges its colors and shapes to make it appear heaven, hell, bardos, out of body, this, that, or the other. But it's just one single alive room. And, this is a good way to explain that. I know I'm going to put this on the podcast, but for anybody watching, just a basic screen. That's the alive room. That's it, just for potential, for anything to pop in it, appear, disappear. All right, so now we're going to go to 2013. So in 2013, then if you were accompanying me in my mind and watching my experience, my internal world, you'd notice that now the emphasis is I'm paying attention to the world as a teacher. The world informing me via TV, pop culture, politics, weather, nature, relationships, math, language. And what I mean by that is that all of a sudden, as the world's teaching me, as I'm walking out in the woods and it's teaching me all these things, all of a sudden it dawns on me. I was like, wow, I've turned my back to the world and have basically considered the world as an impediment to enlightenment. I've looked at the world as an obstacle to truth. I've looked at the world as a problem to get past, as a burden to bear. And all of a sudden, it all flipped around. I was like, oh my God, the world is the fucking Dharmakaya itself appearing as their Manakaya. It's right here. Everything in it is a teacher. Like I said, that's why I wrote down, it's not just nature, it's TV, it's politics, it's music, it's fights, it's science, temperature, barometer, literally everything, dynamic, social relationships, everything is an expression of truth, of reality. And then I had the attitude, I want to dive into it. I know I want to look to the world now that I know the world's a teacher. I want to start noticing it. I want to see what it has to teach me, what it has to show me. Which brings me to the next one, which is feeling what it is to have the full range of the human experience. Self-examination. So like I said, before I pushed the world away, I looked at it as an impediment, as an obstacle. The self, push the self away, push the body away, push anything in the world, because you were looking for straight nothingness. You were looking for straight emptiness, naked nothingness. Strip everything out and see what's there. All right, but now we're naked. Now we're there. And now we're free to explore the reality that presents itself, the world that presents itself, the images that present themselves. So, and I don't really want to get into this too much, but anybody that reads the second book, that's when everything went to hell. The minute, and it's funny, I was just talking to somebody else about this, somebody that's going through an experience that they were feeling like, yes, this is it. I could take on the world. I'm feeling untouchable. I'm feeling like I'm this space of reality, and I'm ready to just surrender and accept whatever comes my way. And as soon as they did that, reality brought them a whole bunch of hardships, misfortunes, things you don't want, things that are undesirable. And that's exactly what happened to me. So I got what I wanted. I was looking at the world. I was like, oh, I want to get back into the world. I want to look at the world and see what it has to offer me. And that's when everything that you'll see in the second book of my family, of coming back and looking at the world and, discovering a family that didn't like me. My wife wanted to leave me. My daughter didn't like me. That's pretty much it, but that's a lot, so it was a world of hell. So anyway, I just think it's important. I think it's noteworthy when you're looking through all these things to point things that out when you see that connection. So I invited it. I looked into it, and boy, howdy did it happen. But I don't want to ruin it, but it was all for the best. It was perfect. All that was perfect. All right, so now we're going to go into 2019. So this is basically the last phase, kind of. But this last phase has been so incredible. I actually separated that between 2019, 2020, 2021. But really, it's been the same phase. Since the years are so close, I'm able to nuance it. All right, so now we get to 2019. And this is when I've had this latest phase that's brought me out here talking about my books and talking to you and doing this. So 2019, then my world dramatically changed. And we could do that. We could have a conversation on that a different day. But 2019, everything dramatically changed. So now the first thing that I wrote down was discovering the world for the first time, returning with extra strength, forged steel, caterpillar wings. Oh, how the caterpillar gets its wings after the darkness. So to be with me, to be in my mind, in my sharing my internal experience of 2019, you'd feel a feeling of resurgence and power. I just turned 50, 2019, at the end of 2019. But boy, just a feeling of power, just a feeling of, I don't want to say power in the conventional way, a feeling of coming into yourself, full potential, that type. Extra strength, better, just alive, a new resurgence, just new, a feeling of newness, a feeling of vitality, whatever. I think you get the gist. So that is what it would be like to be inside my experience as far as the mood, as far as the vibe. And now we could start to get into specifics. The first thing that I wrote specifically, if you were to accompany me in my mind, 2019, I was always in my mind deliberately engaging that which I fear, like the story of Milarepa. And when I say fear, you have to look for tiny little nuances. Like, let's say, I'm going to work and I'm going to be working with this person. I don't like that. You'd even call that a fear. You'd say, there's a fear. You get a little resistance, something that you don't want. There's fear. Now let's deliberately engage in it. So I went through a thing where I was watching my mind, and actually, I'll read the next one first. I probably should have read this in a different order. If you're in my mind, 2019, I was viewing my world as my unconscious. So I'm looking at the world as my unconscious. So if I'm talking to you, I'm looking at you as my unconscious, speaking to me. If I'm looking at a new house or, whatever, anything that I was seeing at this is the my unconscious projected in front of me, and I'm looking at it. So because of that, then I would look at anything I didn't like or anything that I was uncomfortable, any type of noticing anything. And it's got to be subtle. Like I said, you really got to be on the lookout of kind of like what they say when the force is disturbed. Any perturbance in the force whatsoever, you look, and you're never blaming others. It's always you. And you look at it as a fear. There must be a fear. I'm resisting in some subtle way. So a perfect example is this. I never liked teachers or teachings or any of this stuff. I hated it. So I recognized that as a fear. So that's why I jumped into this, to approach, to jump into something that I had to recognize as a fear because I resisted it. I didn't like it. So if you're in my mind at 2019, you'd see me watching my mind, and then anything that came up of any resistance or anything, I saw it as a fear, and I just want to go to it, want to jump in it and just envelop the fear. And the next thing I wrote was my experience was noticing a rotating globe that always turned to reveal the other side of whatever thought presented itself. Of every thought I had. And what I mean by that is, if you were with me in my mind, 2019, like let's say I'm going from a walk with my wife and I notice a thought come in my head, I'd have the thought of, and I'm not going to try to think of a specific, but whatever the thought was, as soon as I would have that thought, I'd watch that thought slowly turn by itself, and it would reveal the opposite thought. Like, I want to go, I don't know. It's hard to think of an example, but it doesn't matter what the example is. But anytime you would have any thought, the other side of that thought will reveal itself. Oh, I think this. Oh, what about that? Or I want to do it this way. What about that way? Or later, if it's important to people, I'll come up with specific examples. But the experience is like a rotating globe that as you watched your thought, like your whole mind space, you're watching your thought. And then as the thought moves, it reveals the other side of that thought. So it was like completing itself, showing you the other side of it. All right. So now we'll go to 2020. In 2020, the first thing I wrote down is the unborn mind. That was if you were with me in my mind, having my experience, 2020, that was always the word or phrase or the feeling, the expression always coming up. Everything, just the unborn mind, unborn mind, unborn mind. The feeling, or not feeling, but experience of the mind before any movement happens. The moment prior to, that you're so aware of the prior to before it's born, that becomes more home than the born. The unborn seems more foundational, more of your baseline than the born itself. It's more familiar, it's more real, it's more, you identify more with it. But the unborn, I just find myself attracted, just the unborn, the unborn, the unborn. So if you were in my mind, 2020, you'd notice a lot of just returning to the unborn, the unborn, the unborn. The next thing I wrote down was, it's all vaporous, and the only thing that matters is that which stays. That's when I just started to notice, what I mean by vaporous is usually it's conversations, it's interests, it's fascinations, it's anything. It's all vaporous. I was just, if you're in my mind, 2020, you're just experiencing that whenever thoughts or anything comes, nothing seemed important because it's all vaporous. It's all vaporous. You don't want to talk to people about this because it's vaporous. It doesn't matter. You don't want to have conversations because they're vaporous. And what I mean by vaporous is most conversations you're having, it doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't mean anything. You're going to talk and then nothing's going to come out of it. It's just vaporous. It meant nothing. A lot of people really get into things and go back and forth and have all this weird energy. And maybe that's it. Maybe people just want to have a weird exchange of energy through words, of a going back and forth in words. But it's vaporous. It just means nothing. And just an extreme loss of interest in anything vaporous, because the only thing that matters is that which stays. So you notice the vaporous. You just notice that everything's vaporous and nothing really matters. And that the only thing that matters is that which stays. That becomes your the prize, the target, where you want to be, where you want to abide, where your home is the unborn mind, that which stays. And the vaporous just, it doesn't have any appeal because it's vaporous. All right, next is noticing beginnings and endings everywhere. The contrast to the unmoving. What I mean by that is, and this is something just recently, I don't know why, but all of a sudden I noticed on the walks with my wife, we go on walks every night, and I noticed when I was walking out, all of a sudden I just noticed beginnings and endings everywhere. You're just noticing, just like, look, the mailbox has got a beginning and ending. The house has got a beginning and ending. Everything, the car has got a beginning and ending. Just so if you're in my mind, sharing my mental experience, you'd be noticing just beginnings and endings. The beginning everywhere is a beginning and ending, beginning and ending. Look, a beginning and ending, a beginning and ending, a beginning. Everything's beginnings and endings. And the reason, I guess, it's so fascinating, not attractive. It captures your attention. The reason it captures your attention is because you're experiencing the unmoving, the undifferentiated. So being the undifferentiated, the unmoving, you just notice the beginnings and endings. That's everywhere. That there's nothing but beginnings and endings. Everything has got a beginning and ending. Everything in beginning. And it just seemed noteworthy. That's the word I was looking for. It just seems so noteworthy because of the contrast. The contrast of there being no beginnings and endings. Because that's reality. In reality, there's no beginnings and endings. There's just this. But within this, there's the appearances. Things are being born, beginnings and endings. And then even the things that seemingly stay, like this microphone has been here this whole conversation, yet it's got a beginning and an ending. It's measurable. And that contrasts with the immeasurable, and that just grabs your attention. Look at that. Look at all these fucking things that have a beginning and an ending. All right, maybe that's weird, but that's something I just noticed a lot. Everything's got fucking beginnings and endings. All right. The next thing I wrote down was always a slow reveal of a teaching. That's another thing I just, so if you're in my mind, 2020, you're noticing the whole world is a slow motion teacher teaching you something so slowly, it could take 10 years to teach you. And we're used to living in a world where things are happening this quick and that fast and, talk to me and hear you. But it's teaching you just slowly. The whole thing is a slow reveal. Your whole life is a slow reveal. Probably collectively, the whole time was a slow reveal. But you become more aware, at least I became more aware of this in 2020, just noticing everything. It's just a slow reveal of a teaching. And perhaps it's just the one teaching, and we're all just interpreting that one teaching a different way. But there is always a slow reveal of a teaching. And so if you're in my world, in my experience, it's a lot of just looking out and just seeing this all as a slow reveal of a teaching. And slow, maybe take 10 years. It's interesting if you think about realities from different time frames, like a fly or like a star, different experiences based on time. We only know the human experience. And if you meditate, that drops away to offer different experiences, but it doesn't say anything specifically about a cricket's experience or a star's experience or a lightning bolt, if, whatever. That's helpful to think about is the nature of time. All right. Always a slow reveal of a teaching. So the last thing I wrote for 2020 was aware of the original tension underlying every dynamic of the moving world. And what I mean by that is when I go out about in life and I'm engaging in the world and I notice stories or people tell me stories, everything that's happening, I just see it as an outward manifestation of the original tension. So basically, in reality, underneath all of this, everything you see, the paint, the house, the cars, the people, the skin, the flesh, the snow, the rain, the planets, the stars, underneath all of that is just an energy, let's just say. So underneath of all that is an energy or a tension. And what that energy is or what that tension is the tension of awareness. And the reason awareness is tension is because the nature of awareness is to be aware. So it's space and it's receptive, but there's nothing else. So that tension of that receptivity and be in space would have no choice but to invaginate in on itself like a black hole, suck in on itself from that power of its receptiveness, that power of the life, awareness, aliveness. All right. So in Dzogchen, they call that clarity, but we'll call that aliveness. So because of that aliveness, is there, and that's all there is, it's going to have no choice but to invaginate in on itself like a black hole. And why did I just say that? Oh, yeah, and that is the original tension. So the original tension is just that tension of awareness, just like you are. You have a tension too of being aware. It's being pulled towards what you're attracted to, being pulled towards what your attention is attracted to, like a magnet. So, okay. And I'm not going to get into all of this, but I'll give you an example since we're talking about what my mental experience is. So if you go down several levels of the original tension, so the original tension is just awareness, aware of itself. That is attention itself. But a few levels down, let's say it manifests in the form of, let's say, basic security versus freedom. Opening versus closing. So there's just the tension, and the tension is either opening for freedom or closing for security. So let's drill down. So on one level, that's really all it is. All that's underneath of all this is just opening or closing. Then you could go up another level and say, well, the opening and closing could be security versus freedom. That's a whole other level because now we're into concepts of security versus freedom. then we could take it a whole other level where it's your personal experience of the tension of security versus freedom. So basically what I'm saying is I could watch somebody saying, oh, I'm having a fight with my mom, or I'm watching politics and I don't like the way this politician is doing things. It's all the underlying tension, and that, like I said, it manifests as the basic security versus freedom. So everything that you're saying, that you're experiencing is the tension between security versus freedom. And let's say that's the 8th level, but there's all kinds of levels down, all the way down to awareness. And the final level that we experience things is our relationships with our friends, or people, our relationships with others, or our mental dynamics within ourselves. But like I said, it's always going to come down to that original tension, which on one level we could just say is security versus freedom, or openness versus closed, contraction versus collection, whatever it is. It's part of that original tension. But most of us are only experiencing it, like I said, with the relationships with others or ourselves. But that is just like the most superficial layer of the original tension that is happening right now, which is awareness. So anyway, so what I said was I'm aware of the original tension underlying every dynamic of the moving world. And so what I mean by that is that when I'm looking at the world, I'm just seeing the underlying tension between everything. It's what's responsible for electricity. It's what's responsible for weather. It's what's responsible for money and buying and shopping and sex and killing. And everything comes from that is an expression of that original tension. So so if you're in my mind, 2020, you'd watch me or feel me, or you, if you're in my experience, looking at the world and seeing it and recognizing it as the original tension, echoing out to so many layers. It turns out to be two guys in the street fighting, but it's really just the original tension, just up so many different levels, from conceptuality to physics, all the way down to apparitions of people fighting in the streets. But it's nevertheless just the original tension underlying the very dynamic of the moving world. All right, so now we get to 2021. So this is the stuff that was actually freshest on my mind. So when I sat there that night, a couple nights ago, and thinking, what is my experience? These were actually the first things that came up because I was looking at what's happening now. Only when I dug deeper did I come up with that other stuff. But the first things that came up in order that I wrote were in 2021, what's going on very recently in my world. So if you were to be with Mark in his mind now, 2021, this is what it would be like now. So the first thing that I wrote down is that butter that melts before it hits the surface. And again, it's just a symbol to represent a feeling that gives me. So just imagine taking pat of butter, a stick of butter, and you're about to place it in a pan, stick it in a pan, but the pan is so hot that the butter actually disintegrates before it ever reaches the pan. And that's what my life feels like now. And that's kind of the what do you call it? The thing that I'm always talking about, God damn it, I don't know. I forgot what I call it, the vortex or the wedge or the funnel. All right. So butter that melts before it hits the surface. So if you were to be with me and share my experience, what it would feel like is nothing. No conditions could ever come to complete formation because they melt before they hit the surface. It's like there's a disintegrating force, that anything that comes within the disintegrating force melts before it could actually hit the surface. And again, if that doesn't really convey any feelings for you, the gestalt I get from that feeling is like you're feeling in a flux to where you can't ever get the end. You can't ever get the end. It burns up upon impact, before impact. It disintegrates as it's formed. So, all right, so we'll do more. So the next one I wrote down was expanding space. So it's not just being space. It's not just feeling of being space, But when I look for my experience the other night and like, what is this like? It's not just space, but it's like expanding space, which I know sounds like moving space, but I'm just describing it as I see it. Expanding space. So two things: one, space, but active space is something, when I look to my experience, space, but alive space, active space, and that feeling of expansiveness, growing. Next, I wrote down love and gratitude. And I know I wrote that before, but I guess it bears worth repeating again, that's, if you were to be with me in my mind, 2020, there's just constant reminders of feeling of love and feeling gratitude again for this. And maybe the recognition of this, maybe the awareness of this, but this. I guess it would have to be the recognition or awareness of this, because this is this no matter what. So the only thing I could be grateful for is the awareness of this, the recognition of this. So I guess that's what I'm grateful for, because this is this no matter what. But to recognize this is to feel gratitude. All right. The next thing I wrote is receptiveness. Again, because I looked for my experience, and what you find is just the capacity for being receptive, the capacity for receiving, the capacity for holding, containing, the capacity for containing, being receptive, to receive, the ability to receive. That's something. But again, actually, that's not something I ever noticed. That's just something, like I said, when she asked me to look for my experience, I just noticed receptiveness. Aha. But listen to why I wrote that down for the next part. The reason I wrote that down is because I found an important distinction or nuance that I notice when I look for my basic experience. I notice I become aware of the spaciousness before the receptivity. And I just thought that was worth noting, because at the core of this all, of everything, is what I call aware space. And in Dzogchen, they call clarity and emptiness. But here, I'm using the word spaciousness and receptivity. So the receptivity would be the active part. That would be, in Dzogchen, what they call the clarity. And for me, that would be what I'm calling the awareness. So aware space or receptive space. So I wrote down that I was aware of the spaciousness and then receptivity. So I just thought that was worth noting. I thought that was interesting. When you look for your experience, for me, I noticed the spaciousness, then the quality of it being receptive. Just think that's worth noting. All right. Next, I wrote down drawn towards content that shares the qualities of space that encompass it, such as peaceful music, Dharmic sutras, nature, water, etc. And again, that's something very new to me. Very new, like just within these last few months. I'm listening to these Dharmic teachings, the Dzogchen teachings, the Logchampa, and all this stuff. I have it on 24 hours a day, but I don't even watch TV anymore. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Before that, I would have TV on or music or something going on. But now, these last couple months, I'm drawn towards content that shares the qualities of the space that encompass it, such as peaceful music or the Dharma teachings. That's new. And then I wrote down, I'm in love with the ground. And I think I talked about that the last talk, so I won't go into it. But I guess just the recognition of the ground, the foundation, like that's the thing that I'm just recognizing and being grateful for, is just the ground. Like the ground is it. That's the prize. That's the target. That's the touchstone, is the ground. So if you were with me, 2021, if you're sharing my mental experience, it's a lot of just enjoying being the ground. Just appreciating the recognition of the ground. All right. So I'm in love with the ground, the pure awareness. Okay. So the next thing that I wrote down was every rising that meets the arising is instantly recognized and dropped, except in intentional contemplation. And what I mean by that is this is kind of a new a teaching symbol that I discovered as I was trying to help my wife. So I was trying to, because my wife, as I just said, she really just got into the Dzogchen teachings. So she went into work and she had a really difficult time, putting all this into practice. So I was trying to think of something helpful for her. I was trying to think of a way of how she can put these teachings into action, like to make these actionable, to make the Dzogchen teachings actionable. So this is what I did, and this is what I'll show you too. Oh yes, so when I said every rising that meets the arising is instantly recognized and dropped. So this is the teaching tool that I came up with, and I'll share with you. So what I said was, you don't have any control over the arising. So what I mean by that is you can't control the arising things that are appearing in your mind. They're coming and they're going. These are errors, by the way. So you can't help the arising. But you are down here. You are, all right. I'm going to draw the picture and then bring it up so I could actually see what I'm drawing. All right. So you are the foundation down here. You're the witness for spontaneous arisings. And by the way, the spontaneous arisings, they could be people or they could be thoughts. Anything that appears, whether it be the world, cars, people, or thoughts, or feelings, or tensions, or identification, or attachment, or anger, anything. It's just an arising. We're the only ones that make distinctions between people, erasers, and anger. They're all just arisings. Okay, so we are awareness on the bottom, and then there's the arisings on top. So we have no control over the arisings, but we do have control over our attention. So we could either allow and let the arisings leave as they are on their own nature, or we could rise to meet the arising. And what I mean by rising to meet the arising, that means to take our attention and to let your attention be attracted to and rise to meet the arising. So that's what I mean. That's what I mean by rise to meet the arising. So your attention should be down here to just witness the arising. But you have the choice to either stay here as the witness and just let the arising do its thing, or you could rise with your attention and attraction to meet the arising. And when you take your attention and you rise it to meet the arising, you're going to animate whatever that arising thing is. You're going to animate that thought and make that arising seem real, whether it be the anger or whether it be a concept that you're concerned with. Whatever the arising thing is by you taking your awareness and lending your awareness through your attention to the arising, you're giving it life. So rising to meet the arising, oh, yes, that's what I was saying. So what I experience now is if I find myself rising to meet the arising, let's say there's a thought or appearance that attracts me, and I do find myself giving my attention to it, the moment you recognize that you arise to meet the arising, the moment you recognize it, you drop. And then this thing drops right back down. And it's like a waveform. You could draw it like a waveform. But and the reason I say to draw it like a waveform is because then you could see there's less and less waveforms, and that's what this practice is you can't help but to rise to the arising. I get that. So again, you have to take this all into the spirit of Dzogchen, of everything's perfect, and even if you do rise to meet the arising, that's fine. Drop back down and wait for the next arising. But it's just to recognize it. So it's not to chastise yourself. It's not to say, ooh, I messed up. I rose to the arising. It's just to recognize that you rose to the arising and then just to drop it. And then you go on in confidence. Because you can go on in confidence because you know that you'll recognize it again if you rise to the arising. So you don't have to think. You don't have to practice. You don't have to try to hold on to your attention. You don't have to try to maintain it. You don't have to try to stay there, because you have the confidence that you will recognize if you do get caught rising to the arising, that you will recognize it and you will drop it spontaneously because of your practice, and you'll go on confidently. And then it'll rise again, and that's it. That's all that life is. And there's just less and less waveforms. There's less and less of it. So anyway, I wrote down every rising that meets the arising is instantly recognized and dropped, except in intentional contemplation. So intentional contemplation is when you're deliberately engaging the mind to show you something. You're deliberately engaging the mind to show you, symbols, to open up, to, whatever you want from the mind, you deliberately engage it. So unless you're deliberately contemplating something, so if you were to be with Mark in his mind 2021, what you would see is all the risings happen, and then every once in a while you'd see Mark arise to meet the attention of the arising, and then recognizing, oh, I'm giving this thing life, and then you spontaneously drop it, and you go about in confidence that whatever. Now you're back in the present. Now you're here. Now you're home again, and you don't have to try to fight for it. You don't have to try to maintain it. You go on in confidence, just knowing that if you feel yourself swept out of it, you're going to remember it, you're going to recognize it, and you're going to spontaneously drop just from the distaste, just from the natural and spontaneous distaste. Like, that's not what I'm into anymore. All right. Next, I have watching the sequence of arising and decaying and noticing all the various stages within the cycle. And again, that's going back to what I've already shared with you about the clock. I don't know if I shared this with everybody, and I don't want to get into it too deep because it's a whole podcast in itself. But basically, I just saw that there's cycles of life. There's always cycles of life. When I say cycles of life, that could be cycles of a day. It could be cycles of a week. It could be cycles of a month, a year. But there's a cycle. In the cycle, the analogy that I use for the cycle is a clock. That if you were to take a ball and drop it off the top of a clock from the 12, it would have a lot of speed and a lot of momentum going down to the 6. And then once it gets past the 6, it would start to meet resistance. And by the time it gets to the 9, it would have a lot of friction, a lot of resistance, so it barely makes it to the 12. And basically, I'm saying all of life, we're in one stage of one of those positions on the clock. You're at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and it's all perfect. It doesn't matter. You're just a position on the clock. So if you could be with Mark 2021, when I'm listening to people tell me about their stories, they're telling me about the suffering, or if I'm watching suffering myself, a cat getting hurt or a dog, or I'm seeing something on TV, I'm interpreting it as a position on the clock. Oh, this is when the thing's just started. Oh, this is when the thing's about to die. Oh, this is when the thing is about to meet the tension. So everything is perfect in the sense that it's a natural part of the cycle. So if you were with me watching my experience, you'd see somebody watching the world as if it's all part of a very specific cycle, a very specific part of a cycle. And that's what I mean by watching the sequence of the arising and decaying and noticing all the various stages within the cycle. All right. Next, I have any thought that survives past the spontaneous dropping is suspended in the empty field of Nagarjuna's four negations, which points back to the field of unknowing or spacious, clear emptiness. And what I mean by that is watching the sequence, any thought that, okay, so any thought. So, okay, yes, okay, yeah. So this is a little bit deeper. So now let's say if you're with Mark, 2021, and now Mark is actually contemplating. So he is deliberately engaging the mind. And he's contemplating a topic, which is happening a lot because I'm talking to people and I'm sharing things and I have to explain my concepts now. And then I have to explain why I contradicted myself and I have to explain why I don't make sense. So... okay, so I've noticed that because of that, I'm starting to draw on Nagarjuna's or Nagarjuna's four negations. And I love it. I absolutely love it. So let's just say today I was talking to somebody, and they were going through an experience to where they were saying that things were meaningless, that they felt like things were meaningless. And so I went back and I thought about when I felt the same way, that everything was meaningless. And the reason that you get to a place to where you think that things are meaningless is because you see through the illusion that things are meaningful. So you go through an experience where you start off thinking things are meaningful. Everything in life is meaningful. This is meaningful. That's meaningful. Everything is meaning, and it's all meaningful. But then when you get on this path, you do start to see through that, and you start to see that things are not meaningful. And I guess that naturally leads you to think that things are meaningless, but that's still just a phase, because eventually you're going to see that just because things are not meaningful, it does not necessarily mean that things are meaningless. And that's when Nagarjuna's four negations are helpful. And I don't even know if I'm interpreting it right, but basically I see it as an expanded version of my insight, which was it always is and it isn't simultaneously. That's something I just noticed. Everything in life, it always is and it isn't simultaneously. And you could prove it in each circumstance, each condition. You could demonstrate how, yes, it is and it isn't, and that contradiction's everywhere. But Nagarjuna took those four negations and took it even further and deeper, and I'm really loving that and seeing that. And so let's just take the concept of being meaningless or meaningful. So let's say you take the position that things are meaningful. Nagarjuna, okay, my way of addressing that would say things are both meaningful and not meaningful. I would say it is and it isn't. Nagarjuna, it does it even better. He'd say it's not that things are meaningful, and it's not that things are not meaningful, and it's not that they're both meaningful and not meaningful, and it's not that they're neither meaningful or not meaningful. And what he means by that, or at least what I interpret him to mean by that, is it leaves you in a space of like a quantum flux, a state of, first of all, it should take you to a don't know mind. Instead of it being definitively meaningful or definitively not meaning, it should take you to a don't know mind. A suspended animation where you're just in the air with nothing. Not this way. You can't grasp it. You can't go, yes, it is, yes, it isn't, and it's not even both, and it's not even either. It should leave you suspended in emanation with no foundation for your feet to rest on. It should just leave you suspended with nothing. Just pure don't know mind. But also, it also speaks to the feeling of the potentiality, because you can't necessarily say it's not. It's not even that it's not. It's not even correct to say that it's not, because of that field of potentiality where it is, it isn't, it both isn't, and neither is. All these things simultaneously from the ground of potentiality. So, what did I say? Any thought that survives past the spontaneous dropping is suspended in the empty field of Nagarjuna's four negations. So in other words, as I'm now operating my mind and I'm starting to think about all these, concepts, talking to people, trying to work through these concepts, every time I take a concept, it always ends up suspended in animation of nothingness from Nagarjuna's four negations. You could take anything. You could take choice versus free will. It's not that there's choice. It's not that there's not choice. It's not that there's both choice and unchoice. It's not that there's neither choice and unchoice. It's a quantum flux of nothing, but just more than nothing, of nothing and potentiality. Again, so it's not nothing, and it's not nothing. It's not nothing and both nothing, or neither nothing and not nothing. It's the state of, I could just feel it like not falling off of a cliff, but just freezing or suspended in space of pure potentiality. So, and I'm saying that again because I'm trying to share what it's like to experience the, my mental world, what it's like to be, seeing the mental landscape of my experience, my internal world. All right, and now the last one. Now these come down to the very last ones that are really just coming down to what my life has been like in the last couple weeks. Because in the last couple weeks, I had something even more different, to where I described it was I felt like I lost a muscle. I was trying to describe it to my wife. I was like, I feel like something happened where I just lost a muscle. I don't have the ability that I had yesterday. And that muscle is the ability to pretend, or maybe to pretend to care. I'm not sure exactly, but it's a feeling like you lost a muscle. And then when you look at what you feel the difference is, what that muscle caused, the result of losing that muscle, the only thing I noticed that's palpable is the ability to fake it, to pretend. Because I think anybody that knows me told me I've been faking it and lying these last 20 years, even before that. But that's just been my tactic, just being very insincere, just lying, just doing whatever I can to get through a conversation to get back to me. Silence. But anyway, so recently, so if you're in my experience now, like I said, you'd notice this lack of a muscle, this feeling of something has gone away that was just there. That is kind of a difference, something, a newness. The feeling you'd get as if a tension that was there, which a muscle is, like a clam, like a tension of a muscle holding a clam together, and then that muscle disappeared. So that, and then the last very thing only just happened a couple of days ago, and this is weird. I'm just going to say the word and then explain it. But the other day I had a little mini experience, and then after I named the experience, the first thing I did was I said, it feels like possession. Or I didn't say possession. I was like, this is possession. So when I said the word possession, or I didn't know if I said it, I could have just thought it. I could have just named it. But after I named what I had just experienced happen, so an experience happens and I name it, this is possession, or I'm possessed, something possessed. So as soon as I heard the word possession, I had the same reaction that you do. That doesn't sound good. Possession doesn't sound good. It sounds scary. But it wasn't scary. It was a little strange, intense, powerful, let's say, but not scary. So anyway, so the series of events where I experienced this event, I name it in my thoughts, or maybe out loud, probably in my thoughts, possession. Like you're possessed. And then I hear the word possessed, and then I'm thinking that doesn't sound like a good word, possessed. And maybe I'm thinking, is that accurate? Because that sounds like a bad word, and this thing that you just experienced wasn't bad. So I had a reaction. So in slow motion, it feels like this. I had an experience. Then I named the experience possession. I feel possessed. Then it was hearing the word possessed and thinking, oh, that's not, possession sounds bad. Let's, examine it. And so when I examined it, like I said, all this is happening in a split 2 seconds. So then when I look back, really what I was feeling was an expression in Zen that they have called being the host for the host. And to better explain being host for the host, since they're both the same word, is you would spell the first host with a small h and the second host with a capital H. So it would look like to be the host with a small h for the host with a capital H. So to be the host for the host is to host the capital H. And obviously the capital H host is the mind. That's awareness. That's everything, the foundation. And so to host the host is basically to open yourself and to host the host. So that's probably why that phrase came up in my mind right after possession. It was like, I have this experience, and then the word that comes up is, this feels like possession. and then you hear the word possession and you correct it or modify it with, no, this is like the host for the host. Like you're hosting something. Like you're just being the space for something else. And that feeling, that momentary feeling of possession was being the host. I was possessed by just awareness. So it's just you, but yet it was that feeling of just being possessed, being the host for the host. Like you're kind of actually like the cover of my book, the second book, where I draw the guy blackened out, like he's nothing, watching the world. It was just that feeling again, but just on a much deeper level. So anyway, that brings us to the last, if you were in Mark's sphere of experience, like that would be the last notable experience I had, was just that feeling of being the host for the host. Like you're making space for something bigger, that you're creating space for something bigger than you. And that's it. So this is probably my longest podcast ever. So I'm sure everybody probably didn't even get to the end. I doubt anybody's ever going to get to the end of that. But anyway, maybe I'll break it up into 2 parts, or you could break it up into 2 parts. But yeah, thanks for listening. I appreciate that. I had fun. And if anybody has any more questions or things like that, show up to the next group discussion. Like I said, it'll be every other Sunday, 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you Google to figure out what time yours is, but it's 1 p.m. I think it's 1 p.m., isn't it? Wait, let me think about that for a second. Yes, 1 p.m. 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every other Sunday. All right, that's it for this episode of In Bad Form. I'm your host, Mark Levitt. Thank you, and have a great day. Bye-bye. Okay. And stop.